NDMD, why doctors quit medicine.
If you've been on social media and in the healthcare space at all, it would be no surprise when I say there's been a concerning increase in frequency and content surrounding either considering or now making the decision to leave the field of medicine.
I want to focus on the point that he said the frequency of content on leaving medicine has increased. But what a lot of people assume is that the real frequency of actual physicians leaving is also much higher. And I haven't seen any data to provide any clarity there, but I can guarantee that the content has multiplied by several times, and the number of doctors leaving has not multiplied by several times. Maybe it has increased slightly, but not by the same degree as which the coverage of quitting has increased. So keep that in mind.
Observing from a distance, there's been understandable reception to such videos ranging from applause to abhorrence. Naturally, everyone from the outside, and quite honestly, everyone already in medicine, want to know just one thing. Why is everyone leaving medicine?
I get why Andy is saying, why is everyone leaving medicine? But again, I want to, not to be a stickler here, but I want to just clarify that there's this perception that what's happening on YouTube and social media, is representative of the whole world or the whole US or whatever. Not the case, right? It's not everyone. It's a tiny fraction that is leaving. We're just getting a lot more coverage now and much more discussion about it, okay?
For those who are new to the channel, my name is Andy. I graduated from a 7-year combined BSND program, and I'm a current anesthesia resident at Yale.
We did an episode, I think it was more like a podcast, but Andy's a great guy, and we had a great discussion, so link to that video down below.
The answer for would you ever leave medicine, for me, has still always been no. However, I also would be lying to you if I said that thought never crossed my mind.
So he's an anesthesiology resident, and I would be so curious to see data on the rates of leaving medicine based on specialty. Anecdotally, when I was in my training, I remember people leaving quite frequently in general surgery where they either left medicine or they went to a different specialty within medicine. And anesthesiology is known to have a much better lifestyle. I would expect that the rate would be lower there, where you can have a better lifestyle and even have a side hustle much more sustainably than something like general surgery. But food for thought, right? Specialty choice is important.
The first area of trouble that people encounter off the starting blocks is misunderstanding that the field of medicine is not the same and not equal to the idea of medicine.
Thank you, Andy. That is a point that I have said countless times on both this channel and Med School Insiders, which is that the public perception of medicine is different than the reality of medicine. And what I and other people like Andy are trying to do on social media, and many of our colleagues as well who do great stuff, is bring light to the fact that the idea of medicine for a pre-med or anyone who is outside of medicine is very different. And what we try to do is add clarity, perspective. We do Day in the Life series. We do So You Want to Be. We try to bridge that gap. So the perception and reality gets closer and closer and closer, rather than being so far removed as it is right now.
There are two schools of thought that delineate this, I found. Do you see medicine as a study of humanity or as a study of engineering? Do you see it as an opportunity for innovation or an opportunity to meet people where they are? This notion is fundamentally important to any future internal debate that you have about the field before you've ever stepped foot in a med school lecture hall.
I like how he's categorizing it here as two different approaches. Andy's a sharp guy. I got to poke in with the nuance and the balanced approach. I do think it's a combination, right? I do think it's an approach of both science and humanities. And the truth with most things in life is somewhere in the middle. But what he's arguing is that, hey, just for the sake of argument and understanding this framework, let's think of these two extremes, although a lot of people are going to find some balance point in the middle.
We are sold this idea that everything can and will be fixed with more work and more effort. Hell, that's why we all got here in the first place, right?
By the way, that's what I believe too. More time, more effort. And it worked. It works to a certain degree. And then I learned that there's just a better way to study. And I wish I had studied properly. And I'm actually thinking about making a course on how to study better. But for now, you can go to our study playlist that goes over just about everything you ever need to know. In my first ever video, pre-med study strategies, what I wish I knew in college. It was me as a final year med student, thinking back, being like, dude, college would have been so much easier if I just studied the way that I study in med school. But you don't know, because in college, you're able to get by with putting in time and effort, even with suboptimal strategies. In med school, you can't get away with it. So you are forced then to study in a more optimal, more evidence-based and effective way.
You didn't get into med school the first cycle. Buckle down, work harder, add more lines to that CV, and you can change that.
And hopefully work with an admissions expert on why you didn't get in, because it may not just be a matter of adding line items to your CV. It may be a matter of your interview skills were suboptimal, which is why you got a lot of interview invites but no acceptances, or you didn't get any interview invites because your actual narrative and story and personal statement were weak, or your letters of recommendation were weak. There's all these different factors, and sometimes when people are frustrated they didn't get in, they just hit the ground running. All right, work harder. But you don't want to waste effort and then get the same result and not get in a second time. So you want to go through your entire application and have a systematic way of identifying the weaknesses and the possible areas of maximal improvement. Where can you put in 1 unit of effort and get 10 units in return, right? Versus doing the opposite. Don't find one issue in your application where it requires 10 units of effort for 1 unit of return. So essentially, work with an expert. Don't try to do it by yourself. We do offer reapplicant advising at Med School Insiders.
Medicine, if approached as a field of humanity from the get-go, acknowledges inherent imperfection. Imperfection of study and the way you study. The imperfection of health. The imperfection of the people you're treating. And yes, humbly, the imperfection of you as a physician. This understanding realizes that there are parts of this pursuit that will never be solved by technology, surgical prowess, or medications. It begins with meeting your patients and your peers exactly where they are, and ends with the conclusion that trying your best is enough. And in fact, is probably doing a lot more good than you'll ever realize without ever having to put in a single prescription.
What I'm really interested in is those who have that more engineering focus. I wonder if they gravitate to more procedural specialties, more surgical specialties as an example, because you see a problem, you fix the problem, you're done, right? Whereas with primary care, there's a lot of counseling, a lot of motivational interviewing, and many of the improvements are going to depend on lifestyle changes. And that is something that someone that has that engineering mindset is going to be less comfortable with. You have to use elements of both, because if you just focus on, hey, where I'm at is good enough, it's like, well, you always also want to try to improve and make sure you're not just being stagnant and providing suboptimal below the standard of care. But on the other hand, acknowledging that medicine is a human pursuit at the end of the day, and humans are not machines, you can't just have this perfect algorithm that will always execute 100% of the time without error.
Both components and both mindsets are needed to be a successful clinician.
There we go. Perfect.
However, imbalance of the two is what drives so many to leave the field that they got into. But now that you're in, the sunk cost fallacy hits, the doubt of your decisions keep you up at night, you realize you gotta go. But now comes the questions, where and why?
Sunk cost fallacy is so real, man. I remember that hit me really hard. And what makes it even more challenging is you can look back to a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, and you see how hard you were working, not just the time, not just the money, but I remember looking at the effort and the grind for so long, for so many years that got me to this point. And that can be a mindfuck, because the sunk cost fallacy, people often think of the time, the effort, okay, you're at this point. But the thing that tripped me up the most was just that level of grind I put in and day out, to the point where even on, dude, my cousin, so we do Thanksgiving every year, and she sometimes reminds me that, Kevin, remember back when you were in med school at Thanksgiving, we're all just kind of hanging out and you'd be doing Anki cards, which is cringe in hindsight, but it was a grind, man. It was a grind.
When someone decides to leave medicine, it falls into two buckets: moving towards something or moving away from where you are. Now, let's start with the moving towards something branch, because this is what has been making all the headlines lately. Leaving medicine, although it may come to a surprise to everybody else when the video drops, is almost always a calculated decision.
Yeah, unless it's something really catastrophic, it's almost always something that you have thought through for months and months. That was my experience. And speaking with some other people, it's also like, you're not just thinking about it for 1 week or 2 weeks and then, all right, cool, let's pull the trigger. It's such a big decision that you have to give it the consideration, which takes months and months, sometimes even years for certain people.
This includes an outside passion that they found, a business either established or evolving, a lifestyle
that was my experience of business,
more in line with their desires, or a newly shifted priority in their life. Now, why do I emphasize the calculated portion of all of this? Because it is just a matter of simple math, the old business risk assessment. Those who have run the numbers for their outside opportunity and found the risk assessment to be in their favor, therefore they realize that this is a safe investment of their time, their energy, and their money, especially if medicine is no longer fulfilling to this person. I don't quite blame them for going down this line.
Really great point here. So the risk assessment is not just the magnitude of risk, but also your risk tolerance. How symmetric or asymmetric is that risk? Meaning that the odds of a positive or negative outcome, the actual amplitude of that. So let's not even talk about the chances. Let's say it's 50-50. The amplitude of the success and failure in one way or another can be amplified. So that then changes the equation, not just based on, am I going to be successful or not? Is it 95% success, 5% failure, 50-50, whatever, but also the magnitude. So these all come into consideration, and your risk tolerance, like how much in loans do you have? One person asked a really intelligent, really thought-provoking question, which was, Kevin, you left residency, but what if you had 300K in loans? And I was like, wow, yeah, I never really thought about that. But I don't think I would have, because the risk assessment, the calculation shifts in such a huge way. If you don't have loans, you can get merit-based scholarship. That's what I did. Or you get parental help or whatever it is, then the risk profile changes.
The majority of people who are considering leaving medicine fall here in this branch. Here, the goal is to move not because you're going somewhere else, but you know you can't stay where you're at now. If you had the choice to walk away from an uncomfortable and at times abusive relationship, wouldn't you? You don't need to wait for a new potential partner to come into your life to leave a harmful environment. But here is where it divides again into two other schools of thought. First is, I don't want to do this anymore. And second is, I can't do this anymore.
Really interesting distinction he's brought up here that aligns with my experience speaking with others. Most people are going toward something. For me, I was going toward entrepreneurship, and I wasn't really running away from plastics. I was just understanding and facing the hard reality that I could not maintain health, sanity, get good sleep while doing surgical residency and running 2 companies and trying to do a third. So there are other people that feel like they can't do it and they want to quit. And then they figure out what they're going to do after they've already made the decision or after they've already quit, which is a luxury that many people don't have. And again, you talk about the conversation about student loans and safety nets and other options and other opportunities. For most people, there are ups and downs. There are times when you're really happy, feel empowered, feel like, wow, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is a dream job. And other times when you feel, oh my God, this is such a slog and I hate this rotation, or my preceptor is not treating me well, and etc. And I remember talking to some people that felt like, man, I wish I could quit, but I just can't. I got too much in loans. So there are people who feel this way. They want to move away from medicine during those tough times because, again, there are a lot of ups and downs to medical training, and the risk analysis just doesn't allow them to.
If the passion is gone, it's natural to look for a way out. But here, the second branch, I consider to be the saddest of all the reasons. Here resides the silent killer, both metaphorically and unfortunately at times, literally, for many medical trainees. This is where the heart wants so badly to stay, but the system does not allow it to. This is where the tough gets going for far too long, and as I've heard so much in surgery, sours even the sweetest of people. I feel this even now when even being at a program filled with support and joy, it will never be able to save you from work hours that literally any other profession would find personally insulting.
Yeah, I feel like maybe certain people in finance, like investment bankers, work pretty rough hours, but other than a few fields like that, I think that medicine work some of the worst hours. And what makes it worse is not just the number of hours, but the predictability of those hours. So I would much rather work 100 hours a week. I'm already working, well over 60 hours a week right now, but I sleep when I want, I wake up when I want, I work when I want. I would much rather do that and work 100 hours versus work 80 hours completely all over the place, sometimes at night, sometimes during the day, being called in, like unpredictability. So that's a big part of the stressor and burnout situation as well. It's not the only factor, but it is a notable factor that we don't pay enough attention to.
Now, zoom out. The interesting part of all these branches is that they all converge to option one, because in order to leave, they all have to find some sort of other opportunity.
Not always. So again, it depends on, as Andy was talking about, the risk assessment. And some people have ways of really reducing that risk by having that safety net, by not having loans, et cetera, et cetera. And they can just default to something like consulting, and they may take a pay cut versus if they continued and ended up being an attending, but they can afford to do so in a way that many others may not be able to, given loan burdens and things like that. Because if 250K is the average, you gotta remember that's the average. And many people actually have very little to no loans, which means there are many people that have much higher than 250K as well.
But remember how I was really emphasizing the calculated portion earlier? When I don't want to do this anymore leaves, they go into a reluctant or forced period of risk assessment calculation to find the opportunity. A necessary evil in a way, but one which results in I'll keep going on this path while passively looking for something else, and I'll just keep doing this. I don't like it, but I will actively search for a way out. When I can't do this leaves, this starts a period of existential crisis and panic. Words like "this is all I've ever known" and the sunk cost fallacy approach here, leading to search of opportunity that is emotionally driven, and at many points without appropriate risk assessment. Here, an uncalculated decision is often made, for better or worse.
Okay, so the take home there that I'm hearing is that when it's I don't want to do this, you can be a little bit more level-headed and rational. Whereas when you say I can't do this, it's much more emotionally charged and you can't be as objective. And sometimes you make suboptimal decisions. I think that's overall a pretty appropriate way to summarize the situation.
To become a doctor, it requires an undergraduate degree, 4 years in medical school, 3 to 4 years of residency training.
3 to 7 years of residency. Neurosurgery is the longest at 7. Shortest ones would be things like IM, pediatrics, family med, and then fellowship is optional and can add more.
Plus minus 1 to 3 years of additional subspecialty training. Let's just do the math here. If you went directly from high school, graduating at 18 years old, to be a pediatric anesthesiologist like I want to be, it would require 13 years after high school, with 8 of those years without an income, most likely living off of loans. Then in residency, if ideally starting at about 26 years old, let's math it out. As an intern at Yale, I get paid $81,910 before taxes or benefits.
Damn, that's a lot more than I thought.
The governing body for the US residencies, we are restricted to working on average 80 hours a work week. But let's be generous, because even for me, some rotations are better than others, and let's guesstimate 60-hour work weeks.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few anesthesiology residents. I'm not sure how far along in training Andy is, but most of those anesthesiology residents tell me that they're generally working like 55 hours a week on average. So keep that in mind too. In terms of specialties, some are going to work more than others. And yeah, you can go on IM and your clinic is going to be pretty chill, but then when you're on inpatient, ICU, it's going to be way more challenging. Surgery year round is going to be a lot more challenging in terms of hours and unpredictability, being on call. That salary of 82, even by modern standards, I mean, back in my day when I was in residency, it was like 8 years ago, I was making, I think, 52. And sure, even with inflation, that's well outpaced that. And modern averages are right around 60. Yeah, some programs are still like high 50s, some are low 60s. So I think the starting for PGY1 is right around 60, and then it generally increases about like $2,000-ish per year. But some places like Stanford, where unionization has happened, they can negotiate for higher wages. And I wonder, Yale, how they're able to get such high salaries there too. But it's fantastic. Yeah, residents are underpaid. So I'm glad that it's good to see Andy and all the other Yale residents making good money there. And we're seeing good changes at Stanford and hopefully at other places too. We've covered some unionization stuff in this video right up here. But if you want more and talking about salaries, either on this channel or on Med School Insiders, leave a comment below. I want to gauge interest.
There are 52 weeks in a year, and assuming a month is 4 weeks, I get a month of PTO, which leaves 48 working weeks throughout the year.
Yeah, most people only get 2 weeks of PTO.
Multiply 48 weeks by 60 hours, you get 2,880 hours.
I still think that's an overestimation for anesthesia.
Now then, take my raw salary, which is already a gross overestimate, because this is before taxes or benefits out, $81,910 divided by 2,880. That means I'm making about $28.44 per hour as an intern right now. Far above minimum wage. The minimum wage for Connecticut is $16.35 an hour. However, depending on the cost of living in your city of residency, that may be literally just enough to get by.
Yeah, if you're in New York City or another high cost of living city, then oftentimes residency programs will actually add stipends as well. I know one of our mutual friends, Dr. Sean Anderson, he is going to San Diego, and in San Diego, they get a housing stipend. I forget the amount, but that is added in addition to their salary to make it easier to live there. And in a lot of these places, it ends up being actually reasonable.
Without careful financial decisions, something physicians are horrifically and stereotypically not known well for, many end up living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, doctors are bad with money. We have videos on that. White Coat Investor got super popular because he's helping with financial literacy for doctors. And because doctors must be smart enough to, get through the whole process and become doctors. Oh, I must be smart enough with my finances too. But without proper education, you don't need to be very smart to be financially literate, right? They sometimes overestimate their competence. And Dunning-Kruger, they end up making poor financial decisions, get taken advantage of by whatever insurance people. And we have some book summaries around finances for doctors on the Med School Insider channel, linked below, as well as some common mistakes that med students, residents, and doctors make with regards to finances, linked below.
You can make a lot more working a lot less a lot earlier. Then just broadly consider time and opportunity cost.
Okay, so I love the points that Andy is making in the video, but if we're going to make an argument like, oh, you can make a lot more a lot earlier, doing a lot less work and other things, it's very easy for someone else to strawman that argument and say like, that's totally wrong, because we're still in training in residency. It's not like you've put in all that time and effort just to make $28 per hour for the rest of your life. Obviously, in anesthesia, you're gonna be making $400K per year after you finish residency after 3 or 4 years, right? The opportunity cost argument, I totally get. But what people fail to understand is like, oh, you can make so much more money doing other things. It's like, well, you could make way more money in finance or in business, but the guarantee is not there. So a lot of people go into medicine because they are risk averse. They want a guaranteed upper middle class lifestyle where they're making 300, 400, 500K per year. Great money, but they have to work hard over a long period of time to get there, but then they have that guarantee. It is low risk in that sense. It is harder to get into med school. It's harder to get into, it's actually much harder after even med school to get into certain specialties, but the risk, assuming you cross those 2 hurdles, is very, very low. And even if you get into med school, but then can't get into the specialty you want, you can always do a different specialty and still make very good money. So the risk is low. You can make more in finance. You can make more in business. Business, we all know the statistics about how often businesses fail. No guarantee there. That's the highest risk option. And with finance, the compensation range is much wider. So there's no guarantee you're going to be making doctor money, 500K, 400K, and plus per year. Some of the super hard workers and really intelligent, really on top of their game, people in finance can do that, but they're also putting in a lot of hours, working really hard, and there's no guarantee. So again, to make that salary with very low risk in medicine is truly unique. And I'm talking about attending salaries, obviously.
I've already missed multiple significant life events, including weddings and engagements of my close friends. Any one day off that they magically grant me. I'm from Georgia. My family's from Georgia. I'm working in Connecticut. I can't just fly to Georgia for one day and then come back to work. Time is your most valuable commodity, and residency strips any control of that away from you.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, so again, when I do these reaction videos, I'm trying to add balance to the discussion. So here, if Andy is swinging one way, I'm not saying that, hey, I disagree with him and he's wrong. No. I think Andy's saying a lot of good, important, intelligent things. I'm just trying to add the context and the balance here because, yeah, residency is about using you as cheap labor as the first priority. And second priority is educating you to become a well-versed practicing physician who is competent and able to handle patients on their own. If those priorities were switched, things would look very different. We would have a lot more mid-levels to help with scout work that is not relevant to you being an attending. But I remember when I was an intern, I did a lot of scout work that like our NP was like never there. And even my co-residents, like my senior residents were like, yeah, this NP is like, you can't really find her. She's not really there where she's supposed to, but for whatever reason, she doesn't get fired. Like it was a huge mystery. But the way residents are treated is poor. It does not need to be as challenging as it is. And sometimes the older generation thinks that, hey, things aren't that bad and we worked hard too. You guys just got to suck it up, stop being so entitled. And that brings up a whole nother discussion, which many people we've had before. And another consideration, which people don't have, which is that there's a bias, a huge, massive bias that people are completely unaware of, which is that when you look back in your life to the hard times, you tend to perceive it as easier than it actually was. And with that bias, you tend to place a greater emphasis on the difficulty of the current stage. You ask a med student how pre-med was. Oh, dude, pre-med was so easy. Med school is hard. You ask a third-year med student how the first 2 years of med school were. Oh, dude, preclinical so easy. You had complete control of your time. Didn't have to go to the hospital, worry about evaluations. You ask the resident, oh, dude, med school was so easy. You just had to study. You didn't have to put in such long hours. It always seems, oh, that was way more easy. But in reality, it actually wasn't. We just have very selective memory. We have a bias to upplay the difficulty of the current stage where we are suffering and downplay the difficulty of prior stages to make them seem easier in hindsight. And the truth is they are all very challenging in different ways. I would argue that residency is much more about endurance, and I'd say certain moments in med school, such as your third year rotations and especially leading up, your first half of fourth year leading up to when you apply to residency, you're doing away rotations. That is probably the most challenging time for many people, not all, right? So I went into plastics, and to go into plastics, I'm doing these surgical away rotations, and I remember working 19-hour days for a week at a time, and that was tough. That was way tougher than residency, where, yeah, there were times that I was working, I did my 32-hour shifts. I didn't have to then repeat that the next day. And I went back to maybe working a regular 12-hour or 14-hour day because I'm not so worried about impressing the people and, oh, I hope I get in here and evals and things like that. So it's a different kind of game at each stage. And we can break down, actually, you know what? I'll probably do a video on what is the hardest part of med school and then break down the hard parts and the easy parts of each and how they relate to one another. That's probably a good video idea.
So you're probably sitting here wondering, all right, you're complaining a lot. Why haven't you left then yet? I'm reminded of a 4 a.m. conversation I had with a fellow co-resident, an intern in the internal medicine program here at Yale, when we were both on nights in the workroom. He was in finance in New York City for multiple years after college, was having the time of his life, living in a fantastic city, making a lot more than we're making right now.
Okay, two things. First of all, when you say finance bro that then goes to medicine, the first thing that comes to mind is purpose and impact. You're not having the impact, life-changing stuff as a finance bro compared to being a doctor. Second thing, I don't think people really care about how much he was making then versus now as a resident or an intern. I think what people would be more interested in knowing is how much was he making in finance versus how much he will be making as an IM attending. I think that's a much more relevant discussion because he's going to be practicing as an attending for decades. He's currently in residency for IM for 3 years.
And he left. He left to come back to med school. He told me the purpose started to fade, and really, in quotes, my work, I realized, was all in some way, shape, or form making someone else richer.
So here's the thing. In finance, he would most likely be in a much better financial position, assuming he was one of those top performer financial guys that was working hard and because of the opportunity cost. So he didn't have to be making $1 million a year. Let's say he's making $200,000 a year, which is less than the average physician. But if you take the opportunity cost of med school, the cost of med school, the 4 years of not making that much money, the residency where you're also not making that much money, and you take that salary and you invest a reasonable portion, let's say you're an aggressive investor, you live below your means, you follow a white coat investor and you watch our videos on finance and such, and you follow those principles, then the compound interest of those years will be very, very significant and financially may outpace that person's choice to then leave finance and then go into medicine. But again, once you have your Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, your lower levels where you aren't struggling for your housing, your food, you have enough money to live off of and then also save, as you did in finance and as you would in medicine as well, then you can make that decision based on what you want to do. And dude, I was at Thanksgiving and there were some new guests at Thanksgiving that like weren't family, but like, you know, just friends and coworkers and whatever of my cousins and such. And one guy was so unfiltered and he's like, dude, like you left plastic surgery? It's like, oh yeah, that was a while ago. He says, oh wow, I mean, you would have been making a lot of money there, huh? And I was like, okay, I can see where this conversation is going. He is focused primarily on the money. And a lot of people focus primarily on the money because maybe for them, their number one priority is just money, money, money. And it's like, well, you got to realize once you're making 100K, 200K, you don't have to optimize for more money because the marginal utility of that extra dollar is not going to change your happiness level significantly. What will change your happiness more significantly, I'd argue, is lifestyle, impact, meaning, purpose, things like that. Long story short, I told him, yeah, dude, like I didn't leave because I hated plastic. I just had two great options. And one was pulling at me harder that aligned more with my values. And I figured I was going to make a good enough living doing either. There was no guarantee I was going to make plastic surgeon money doing this. People who aren't making much money now, they may, let's say you're a student, you may see the salary being so high in neurosurgery or orthopedic surgery and say, I want to do that. But just keep in mind, man, if you don't like surgery, you would be fucking miserable and you're not even going to get into those specialties because they're so competitive that you need to love it in order to work hard enough and publish and yada, yada, yada. But keep in mind, as a student, even if you're making 300K, 400K as an anesthesiologist, EM doctor, IM doctor, FM doctor, that's going to be a lot of money, man. And you're going to be fine. You don't have to prioritize making an extra 100, 200, 300K. Making that amount of money gives you optionality.
In the technology or computer science space, one of my best friends on the platform, Naman, who is a fellow YouTuber and a software engineer, he remarked when I visited him in New York a few months ago when he was on call, his call, that his call didn't matter. We were exchanging stories from when I was on night call and responding to pages throughout the night, and he was sitting there like, man, all I'm doing is just a triage monkey. All I'm doing is getting a page and figuring out who I need to call to get things fixed. And all that to say that he kind of felt that even though his really basic needs were met, gets paid well, great benefits, I mean, you could practically live in those tech offices, it was all for a company, a deadline, and someone else's project initiative.
Again, valid points from Andy, but devil's advocate here. I don't think that's really a discussion of medicine having meaning and computer science not having meaning. I did a couple years of comp sci. I did like the AP comp sci in high school, and if you're decent at programming, then you're going to finish the assigned task, but then the class has to wait for everyone else. So then me and a couple buddies, we would just like work on our own projects, and we would just go well beyond the course kind of curriculum and start building bots and like doing all this crazy shit, which was exciting. I don't think this is really a discussion on the meaning of the work. It's about that person does not like his current job and working for an employer. He would probably have a lot more satisfaction if he was able to pursue his own interests. Maybe he's the kind of guy that should start his own company or SaaS business or whatever and build it. And I loved building something. I loved, working through these problems and seeing the progress. I just don't want to have people misunderstand that medicine is the only way where you can get purpose and fulfillment. You can impact people, make a meaningful difference, have excitement by building something in computer science. Actually, I was considering computer science in college my first year before I got sick with inflammatory bowel disease, which locked in my decision to become a pediatric gastroenterologist, which, funny how life, the life journey can throw you in different directions. But yeah, I gave up on comp sci because of that. But I still thought that comp sci, and I still do think that comp sci is so fun. It's a puzzle. It's for those who are intellectually curious and like working in that framework. They like math, they like programming. It's fun. It's exciting. But in this story, I don't know his friend. I don't know Naman, but I wonder if he would actually find fulfillment and excitement and satisfaction in a different role within computer science.
All this to say, along with my media background and all my media work, I've seen the grass, and it's honestly not that much greener than where I'm at right now.
That is such a key point. It is so easy to idolize the other side. Grass is greener. If I could wave a magic wand and do anything in the world, I'd be a Formula One driver. In case you can't already tell with all the stuff behind me. And I'm sure that it would be a pretty awesome, dope life. But the truth of the matter is, I don't really understand the downsides. And you can say, oh, yeah, you're traveling a lot, you don't have time with family, and it's a lot of hard work. It's so competitive, and the press, and you have to constantly talk to the press, and then deal with the haters. And I can intellectualize a lot of those things. And there's probably a huge list of things that I don't even understand that aren't even on my radar. But you don't really get it until you're there, which is why it's so important to do your best to shadow, get exposure, watch our videos, Day in the Life, So You Want to Be, to understand something much more deeply, to know the pros and the cons. People idolize the highlight reel. In medicine, when people choose specialties, they get enamored by the zebras, the rare things in that specialty that are exciting. But they say avoid thinking about the zebras because those are going to be very rare in your career. Think about the bread and butter. What are you doing day in and day out? Are you dealing with a lot of diabetes? Or are you catching that one instance of this super rare illness that is seen once every 5 years? And think about the bread and butter, because that's going to be the majority of your life.
Each profession or career has their own unique challenges, none greater than the other, and none invalidated by their rationale. But here, I fell in love with the art of understanding people, and frankly, I knew exactly what I was signing up for.
Andy has this very artistic element to him, and I think that human connection part and human story part comes across in his content when he's interviewing other people or doing the questions. I forget what it's called, like 77 questions or something. Not surprised there. Although I am kind of surprised now that I think about it that he chose anesthesiology, because I would imagine that human connection part, you do get human connection in anesthesiology. You're comforting someone, you're their guardian in a procedure. But I would almost expect him, based on that artistic element and such, that maybe he would do something that has more longitudinal relationship building. But obviously, I don't know Andy that well. Just my initial impression from his very artistic side.
All I ask of those watching, and especially those in healthcare who are pondering their own place on that mind map, is to seek first to understand before quick judgment. And understand that all context of decisions get lost on the internet.
Dude, what a great take. What a great take there.
As a 25-year-old in a new city, my priorities and context of decision making is going to be far different than my peer who is married with a partner and has a kid on the way in residency. And their thought process and context is most certainly going to be different than the 35-year-old who had a previous career and is graduating and starting their medical training with no loans. These are just a few of many examples of all the variables revolve our lives, and our reasons for our decisions is people first, then as clinicians.
Great video, Andy. Happy to see that you're doing well. And I like that conclusion a lot. I think that oftentimes online people jump to conclusions as to what is right, what is wrong, and they think that they fully understand someone and their circumstances, but they don't. And that's something that I brought up in many of the reaction videos as well, is that everyone's circumstances are different and you don't understand those circumstances unless you're actually in their shoes. And family, health, change in priorities, change in life desires, right? I think that when I was 18 years old, I thought that I would want to grind forever, and even in residency, right? Why was I grinding so hard in plastics, trying to be the best possible resident I could be, and then also building these businesses? I mean, this whole workaholic tendency and whatever value and self-worth I derived from that was something I had to work through. And then zooming out and figuring out, well, what do I actually want from life? Oh, I like impact. I like freedom. I like control. I like agency. I like variety. I like growing and learning. And there's no right or wrong. It's your journey. If you do share it with the internet, be prepared, because you are going to get hate. That's just the unfortunate reality of it. There is some small minority of people that like to just hate on others, usually because they're quite miserable themselves. And at the end of the day, what you got to remind yourself of is that it doesn't really matter. It's you and your loved ones, what you think, what you believe that matters most. And if you think you're doing the right thing, then fuck everyone else, man. Like, who cares? And some people are wired more for that than others. I don't think it's bothered me as much as the average person. And perhaps that's my personality at baseline. I've never been shy of differing opinions, and I don't feel like I've never been a people pleaser. Let's just say that. But I think part of it too is that over the years, I've learned that there are a lot of people whose opinions I just don't care about. You know, when someone is super strongly political one way or another, I can't take them seriously because I don't think that they are actually thinking through each policy on their own. They're following an ideology. They're following an identity of a group. And similarly, when I have discussions with people in real life that I'm like, wow, that was a smart take. Wow, I want to talk more with you. Wow, I'm learning so much. And this is such an engaging and thought-provoking, insightful conversation. It's those that can speak with nuance. It's those that can speak to that gray area that aren't going to paint things as black and white. That aren't going to say you're a terrible person or a great person. They're going to say, yeah, you're a mixed bag, just like everyone else. And the circumstances for you quitting medicine, let me put myself in your shoes and try to understand that. Those are the people whose opinions I value because I think I can learn from them. And I think they're speaking from a point of reason and intelligence and logical thinking. And those that say, oh my God, you're a fucking idiot making videos in your mom's backyard, you're going to regret this. I say, okay, cool, man. That just makes for a better story in the end when you overcome whatever challenges you had. Yeah, when I first quit residency, I was making videos in my mom's backyard. But at the end of the day, it's your story. You're the author of your own story, and write the story that's going to make you happiest in the end.